The Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam promises 33% reservation for women in parliament and state assemblies, but it has not yet been implemented. The debate has resurfaced because the promise is big, but the timeline is uncertain. With key steps like census and delimitation yet to happen, questions remain on when women will actually get these seats. I'm Sonakshi Awasthi from TheFederal, and joining me today is political editor Puneet Yadav. Puneet, there are speculations that the centre wants to amend the Women's Reservations Bill. What are the amendments?
See, we don't know for sure what exactly is the text of these amendments because they haven't been shared officially so far. What we know of are through discussions that have been taking place between the government and the opposition over the last few days, and what sources in the government and the opposition have told us. It seems that there are two different sets of amendments that will be brought in. One will be the amendments moved to the, what is popularly called the Women Reservation Law, which was passed in September 2023 in Parliament as the Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam. There will also have to then be a separate set of amendments, from what we hear, to be made to the Constitution. So constitutional amendments to perhaps, in my view, Article 81, Article 82 of the Constitution, because that will then change from what we've been given to understand the overall strength of Parliament. So two separate sets, one on women reservation, one to kind of a set of what you could call as enabling amendments for the rollout of women's reservation. So to the Constitution and then to the bill itself, to the Women Reservation Law itself.
So is the timing of the government's decision a suspect? Like, could the government have incorporated the proposed changes?
This is something that has been raised by all opposition parties. And it was raised even when the bill was actually brought for enactment in September 2023. Because it was, that session in which it was passed was a special session that had been called. The special session itself had been called just about 3 weeks after the monsoon session of Parliament had concluded. So, it came completely out of the blue. It came at a time when the opposition was kind of in the process of forming the India bloc. And so all of a sudden the government brought in this bill, they called for a special session and this bill was brought. And even at that point in time, it was pointed out that while you are bringing an enabling legislation to allow women reservation in Parliament and in state legislatures, the bill seems to have no timeline. When exactly will this be rolled out? When will that 33% of reservation for women in Parliament and only Lok Sabha, this doesn't apply to Rajya Sabha. So Lok Sabha and state legislatures, the assemblies, when will this actually come into effect? None of that was clear. And so this question was raised even at that time. Now, 2.5 years later, again with the same element of surprise, the government brings this in. Before a parliament session is convened, generally the government briefs about the legislative agenda of what it is that the government wants to bring in terms of its laws, bills in that session. So when the budget session was convened, there was no mention of women's reservation amendments being brought in. And in fact, it was the Parliamentary Affairs Minister, Mr. Kiran Rijiju, who I think earlier this month or sometime end of February, while visiting Tawang, his constituency in Arunachal, told the press that there is a surprise that we want to bring. So now, Parliament cannot be run through surprises. There is a process in which you bring laws. There is a process of consultation. There has to be a method that is followed, because then it is bound to raise questions. If you don't follow those processes, those conventions, it will always raise questions on what are your motivations? Are your motivations genuine? Are they political? Are they electoral? So now they're being brought in. What are the circumstances now? You have 5 states going to polls. The first lot of those, 3 of them on the 4th of April, which is a week from now, and then another 2 states towards the end of April, Tamil Nadu and Bengal. So are you trying to, leverage this women reservation narrative for elections? You have another major high-stake set of elections next year, the biggest one being Uttar Pradesh, which is early next year. There are speculations that the amendments are being brought right now so that, the processes that have to follow for the implementation can at least be in place or take off or maybe even completed by the 2027 assembly elections in UP. And then the BJP can kind of leverage that to its advantage. So, when these questions come in, naturally your motivations will be suspect. So that's the issue here.
So it is very clear that the changes that have been brought in this bill is exactly what the opposition had asked for when it was originally enacted.
Yes.
So what is the stand of the opposition right now?
See, so the opposition, there were broadly 2-3 things that the opposition had asked for. One, as I said, they had asked for a timeline. When is it that you're going to implement this? Second, the opposition had asked or had demanded that there should be a quota within quota. So the reservation of 33% for women should not just be 33% of seats reserved for women. And of course, there will be, within this 33%, there will also be reservation for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, which also applies to, the general pool of MPs, I mean the MPs at large. What the opposition wanted was for this reservation to also be extended to OBC women. So a quota within quota, which means 33% for women. Within that 33%, a certain percentage reserved, as is the case generally for SC/ST, and then a new one for OBCs. Now, and then, of course, the third was that please do not link this exercise with the next census and delimitation. So, on all three, the opposition stand remains the same, which is why it will perhaps be difficult for the opposition to kind of really put up any objections to the law being cleared, either of these amendments being cleared. But having said that, the opposition will certainly go to town telling the government that, if you had heard us 2.5 years back, and, that's been a running allegation by the opposition that our views are not taken into account, and belatedly, the government realizes that there was merit in what we had been saying all along, and then does exactly what we've been telling them to. So the same would be the case here whenever these bills are brought, most likely next week, because the session concludes on the 2nd of April. So whenever they are brought, the opposition is likely to insist on this, that see, if you had done all of this and done your homework well in September 2023, you wouldn't have wasted all this time, and you could have, advanced the rollout of women reservation without wasting these 2.5 years. So the opposition stand hasn't changed, except what they are now saying is, because they, as I said, that the motivations here are suspect. So the opposition is saying, don't hurry this through like you did in 2023. Let the current round of assembly elections get over. You have the monsoon session of parliament that will come in July. Have consultations in the meantime. Let these elections get over. All political parties will then be relatively free. So through the months of May and June, have your consultations. Bring a proper law in July in the monsoon session and pass it by consensus. The original bill was also passed by consensus. So that's the view.
You spoke of quota within quota.
Yeah.
Is the centre really willing to consider this?
So from what, again, as I said at the beginning, that, we don't know the full extent of the amendments and all of that. But from what we've been picking is that the way in which they want to roll out women reservation now is by taking the 2011 census as the base. The entire issue with the bill that was passed in 2023 was that the rollout of reservations, even by very conservative estimates, it was believed will not be possible before 2029 Lok Sabha elections, and will possibly come into effect around 2034 Lok Sabha elections. Because the requirement in the constitution is that for which this law was kind of drawing its powers from, was that the entire exercise of reserving seats for women, this 33%, will only happen once the fresh census, the next census, takes place. And as we know, fresh census was supposed to happen in 2021. Yes. That census did not take place because of the pandemic. Subsequently, the government sat over the census for a good 6 years. It is only mid last year that the government announced the census and said that this will be census 2027. Now, to collate the data, to put all of that together, and then proceed with the other, procedures itself and come out with the final figures of the census, roughly takes about a year. So even while you may say census 2027, the final census figures will not be with you till 2028, perhaps even 2029. So, which again means that once that comes in, then you have the requirement of setting up a delimitation commission. Then that takes another 6 to 8 months, and then you roll out reservations. So what the government now wants to do is do away with that requirement altogether, which is what the opposition had said right at the beginning. That don't link it to delimitation, don't link it to the 2027 census. Use 2011 as your base, right? So now if they say 2011 is the base, then they want to basically proceed with that, and then, setting up of delimitation and all of that is what they have in mind.
Okay, so the proposed amendments, you spoke about delimitation. The proposed amendments are likely to change the overall strength of Lok Sabha. Yes. So would that open up another political fault line with the opposition?
See, it's going to possibly open up two fault lines. One would be a legal one, a constitutional fault line, and the other would be political. From what we gather, or what we're given to understand, is that the government wants to increase the current strength of the Lok Sabha, which is 543, to 816 MPs. So 50% hike in the strength of Lok Sabha. Now, the constitution is very clear. Constitution has 2 articles, 81, 82, from which you basically draw your powers of the configuration of parliament. What is the value of the vote, how many votes would translate to how many seats, and all of that, which says one person, one vote, one value. There is, of course, for smaller states, there are riders there, because there are, as you know, all our states don't have an equal population. There are states with a high population, states with a very low population, very sparse population. So states which are much smaller, like a Himachal Pradesh or a J&K, have a different yardstick for the number of seats that they will get in parliament. But those exceptions aside, for all other states, Article 81, 82 are very clear: one person, one vote, one value. Now, how that translates into a fault line is when you say that we're going to increase the number from 543 to 816, you have to then go back and amend those articles of the Constitution. You can't do it unilaterally without an amendment. If you amend it, the other provisions of the Constitution come into play which require delimitation. And where delimitation again draws from one person, one value, one person, one vote, one value. So now what the government is saying is, see, these states like Tamil Nadu, Kerala, which performed very well when we started talking about family planning, to bring down population. These were states that did very well. There are other states also, like say a Himachal Pradesh or a Uttarakhand, where the population is low. Their argument, and specifically in the case of Tamil Nadu, which was very progressive when it came to family planning, was that if you follow the delimitation exercise, which is basically a two-pronged exercise. One, it could just be increase in a change in the character of the seat. Two, a change in the number of seats. So if you change the number of seats using population as the yardstick, then you're actually penalizing the states or punishing the states which performed well on family planning, because our numbers go down as a total proportion, percentage of the overall strength. Whereas states which did not do well on family planning are getting rewarded with greater representation. So now what happens here is the government says, okay, we need to win over the southern states, get them on board. So what the government is offering is, we will increase the number to 816. The current percentage that each state has in parliament. So for instance, say Tamil Nadu's total current percentage in these 543 seats for, hypothetically, let's say is 10%. Okay. We increase the number of seats to 816, your percentage remains at 10%. So you're not going down. But for that to happen, you then have to change the constitutional provision for one person, one vote, one value. If you do it without, you can't just, arbitrarily say that, okay, from next month, 816 members. You'll run afoul of the constitution, somebody will go and challenge it, it will be struck down. So that's the legal fault line. If you do not do that, if you do not find a legal way around it, and you then go back to deciding based on population, you have a problem in hand with the southern states which are saying population cannot be the yardstick. You have to come up with some other formula. So this is not going to be a very easy thing in terms of changing the configuration of the of Lok Sabha, the number of seats and all of that.
This brings me to the last question then. Realistically, is this possible that this can be done in a good time limit?
The way, if they are serious about women reservation, the way they need to do it is again perhaps the way the opposition had suggested, that don't link it to delimitation, don't link it to the census either. You can just say that we are going to reserve 33% and then amend only those portions of the Constitution and of the Parent Act which are about the rollout of the reservation and the implementation of it. So you don't need a delimitation exercise of changing constituencies, changing the number of seats in parliament, changing the character of all of that. Because unlike SC/ST, in terms of women, it's not, SC/ST reservation happens based on the concentration of SC/ST population in a particular constituency. That doesn't apply in the case of women. By and large, it's 50% across the board. So you can't say that, no, this constituency doesn't have enough women, so there's no point reserving it. So one is that. So if you want to do it within a determinate timeline, a timeline that is clear, that is implementable, that's the way to do it.
To keep the delimitation out of the
picture.
Keep
delimitation out of the picture. Otherwise, if you just want to use it for political ends, for a narrative, for rhetoric, then you can do whatever you want to do, and while the actual rollout remains, up in the air in that sense. So it's going to be a bit of we'll have to wait and see once the bills are formally moved and copies of it are shared, what exactly are the kind of provisions that the government wants to bring in, what are the amendments, what do they want to change in terms of the constitution, in terms of the Nari Shakti law, in terms of how do they define even the criteria for reserving the seats for women. Because as of now, we don't even know that. We only know 33% reservation. We don't know whether this reservation will be rotational, which basically means, say New Delhi constituency in the Lok Sabha is reserved in 2029 for women. One way is how reservation works in a lot of local self bodies, local bodies, panchayats, and all of that, is it is rotational. So a constituency that is reserved for women this time may not be reserved for women the next time around. So that is one way, which raises questions of a person's dedication to the constituency. Because if I am elected from New Delhi, if a woman is elected from a constituency and knows that the next time around she may not get a chance, she may not be as seriously committed to that constituency anyway.
I think the same goes for the voters also.
And for the voters, for the parties also. The other way is like SC/ST reservation is fixed for a certain number of years. You fix the reservation that this seat for the next 15 years will remain fixed for women reservation, or 20 years or 25 years, whatever is the period. Because this law has a rider that women reservation will be implemented for 15 years, that's the period, and then it can be extended further. So let's say it is 15 years, so you fix that reservation for a seat for 15 years. But all of this, we need to first know the timelines. We need to know the method in which it is going to be rolled out, which as of now is very unclear.
Would the centre be willing to put the delimitation aside and take the opposition suggestion?
Well, I think, see, now if you're going to merge this with take the opposition suggestion, it becomes problematic, because the government will never want to be seen as caving in to what the opposition is demanding, even if ultimately it does what the opposition asks for, like is happening in this case. But it certainly has the option of doing away with the whole delimitation exercise per se, and whether they want to do it or not is actually the real question here. And if they have the intention of rolling this out, and it's not pure rhetoric and for political leveraging, electoral leveraging, then they can do it. I mean, it's nothing. There's nothing that is going to stop them from delinking this from delimitation of constituencies. But it goes to the basic question of intent.
Thank you so much, Puneet. Thank you.